Welcome to the first Cardinal Talks of the winter semester. Sorry for the confusion, but we're getting started pretty much right on schedule. All right, I'd like to introduce you to J.J. Boehm, our first speaker of this semester. He's the Director of Media and Community Relations, and so he's pretty much our main link between the media and SVSU. So he's going to be talking to you guys today. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you, and that is my day job, and I enjoy that. I also broadcast the SVSU football games on the radio, so you may have become acquainted at least with my work through that. But then, like all of you who have a full class schedule and have jobs and other obligations, you're showing up here for Cardinal Talks on a Friday late morning, and so I also decided, I didn't have enough to do. So most of this presentation is going to go back to my first foray into working on an issues campaign. So this was for an election back in November of 2010, and since then I've also worked on two other election campaigns, most recently this past August for the Saginaw Township Police Millage, and so I'll address that briefly as well, but a lot of the data I'm going to share is from that first campaign that I ran, and kind of the lessons that were something that I learned from that first campaign experience. How many of you are from Saginaw County? Great, that's what I expected, but I thought I'd ask because then I'll get into a little bit about, because this was a Saginaw County-wide election back in November 2010 that I'll be talking about. So, real quickly, this is what people were going to be asked, is whether or not they should renew a tax for the Dow Event Center in downtown Saginaw. And it was going to be at half the rate that it had been when the first millage was passed back in 2001. One of the things that our campaign had to deal with was that among a certain segment of the populations, there was this perception that the Dow Event Center should be self-supporting, and otherwise it should not require any tax revenue to operate. Nationwide, that tends not to be the case. If you have a facility such as the Dow Event Center, it is going to need some sort of public support in order to operate. And back in 2001, they had a special election for this particular issue, and it did pass with 53% support back in 2001. However, those people who were opposed to it back in 2001, I can tell you, were very vocal in the intervening 9 years until this was back on the ballot in 2010. But over those 10 years, you had over 14,000 overnight hotel rooms at local hotels, and so the Convention and Visitors Bureau estimated that about $12.5 million annually is spent in Saginaw County as a result of having the Dow Event Center operating within Saginaw County. And so over the 10 years of that past millage, that's about $125 million of economic activity generated by the Dow Event Center. So, going on in 2010, there were two other county-wide elections in August. One was for Parks and Recreation, the other was for the Castle Museum, which is the historical museum for Saginaw County, and both of those passed very easily with about 2/3 support, but the Dow Event Center campaign was judged to be much more controversial, so that was moved to the November election, and therefore was the only millage question countywide on the November ballot. So, these were my guiding campaign principles. I had no prior political experience before I was asked to chair this particular campaign. And very briefly, to explain my involvement, I went through a program called Leadership Saginaw, and our class decided as the class project we were going to support the Dow Event Center campaign. They had a previous campaign committee, they had a previous campaign chair, but they were having a lot of internal conflict, and so that individual stepped down, and somebody thought that I might be a good fit for this, and so I said, okay, I'll give it a try. And I can get more into that in the questions if you want more of the backstory, but essentially, I didn't know what the heck I was doing, because I'd never done this before, but I said, this is too important, to me, this was too important to fail. I did not want to lose the Dow Event Center for the Saginaw community, so I said, I'm going to give this what I can. And so these were the three campaign principles that I wanted everybody working on our campaign to make sure that they practice. Be positive, be authentic, be factual. So, how do you find the right message, okay? You hear a lot about this in candidate campaigns. So when people are running for president, running for governor, you hear a lot about the right message. It's just as important when you're running an issues campaign. And so I made sure that we went out and conducted polling data. And you'll see some of the examples of that, but I also brought my example from the Saginaw Township Police Millage that I ran this past August. So this is the binder that you get with all kinds of data on what people think based on questions that you ask them to help guide your campaign. And then I brought an example that I can pass around as well of our campaign postcard that was all based on what we found out for this most recent campaign. But Dave Waymeyer was somebody that I knew professionally, and I knew had worked on statewide ballot proposals. And so when I was asked to do this, I said, what should I know? And he said, make sure you conduct a poll. Make sure you find out what people actually think before you start going out and doing all of your campaign work. And so this was the quote that actually convinced the committee that previously had rejected doing polling, and I was able to persuade them we do need to do this. So we hired a polling firm. There's several of them in the state of Michigan that do this kind of work. And so they did a scientific survey of 400 likely voters. There's the margin of error. A phone interview of approximately 10 minutes. The data gained was invaluable. And so for all of you who might be communications majors or political science majors and all those kinds of things, and you complain, why do I have to take math at SVSU? For stuff like this, you actually need to know at least a basic college level mathematic understanding. You at least need to be able to know how to understand and analyze statistics to some degree. So I know that people say, why do I have to take this course? You actually find out even in like public relations type work, there is some mathematics involved. So this is a map of Saginaw County, and it's color coded according to different areas that we focused on for our campaign. So you see that outer blue ring, what we'll call those areas that are furthest away from the Dow Event Center. And then we had the urban core, the city of Saginaw, Buena Vista Township, and Bridgeport Township. And then we have kind of those northern rings of suburbs, including Kochville Township, where SVSU is located. And you'll notice Saginaw Township is shaded its own color, because while they have 40,000 residents, which is only about 20% of the population, they're very important on other countywide elections. If it tends to pass in Saginaw Township, it tends to pass over the entire county. So we broke down our polling, again, scientifically, to make sure that the number of people who responded to our poll corresponded to the actual population in these various geographic areas. So again, initially, are people likely to vote yes? It's actually pretty encouraging. So before we told people anything about this, they actually were pretty encouraged to vote yes. But then after they found out more about it, they were really encouraged and very much more likely to vote yes. Also, notice that the biggest gap between the initial yes vote and the more informed yes vote is in Saginaw Township. That's going to be important later in terms of how we put together our campaign strategy. So, about half of people thought, we already pay enough in taxes. I think that's going to be true most of the time. People like, I don't want to pay more taxes. But 87% of people thought, as I did, that the Dow Event Center was a critically important asset to the Saginaw County community. The other thing we found out is that, again, it's still true today, but it was particularly true in 2010, really in the depths of the recession, that jobs are the #1 message that resonates with people. They want to know, is this going to mean jobs? So, again, jobs and economic impact were the two most important things on voters' minds in that election cycle. Okay? So, people find out that, well, you're actually going to pay less in taxes now than you do on the current millage. That made people more likely to vote yes. People find out that they're only going to pay $8 a year if you own a $70,000 home. That made people more likely to vote yes. But that $8 message was what was most persuasive among swing voters, people who hadn't made up their minds yet. So we really hammered home that $8 message. Again, some other things we found out from the poll: 63% of people, 5 out of every 8 individuals in the county, had attended an event at the Dow Event Center in the past 2 years. This was also very interesting. 3 out of 8 people who voted no 9 years prior said they were going to vote yes this time. This allowed us to engage in some campaign tactics that people had been very reluctant to do previously because, again, those no voters had been very outspoken, very vocal, and the perception of how wide their support was different than what it actually was. So again, a little bit inside our campaign and our tactics. Again, factors in our favor, the millage rate was going down. The Dow Event Center had made some significant capital improvements. The facility back in 2001 really hadn't seen many improvements since it was originally constructed in the early 70s. So it was 30 years old, it was showing its age, but the original millage had paid for some significant improvements. Those other 2 proposals that I mentioned earlier, they had both passed by wide margins. And then we actually knew from the Convention and Visitors Bureau how much economic activity the Dow Event Center generates. Again, strong anti-tax sentiment, that was true in Saginaw, it was true across the state of Michigan in 2010. Again, people were having a hard time finding work, many of them had seen their wages reduced, so anything that was regarding taxes, they're saying, my pocketbook is already stretched. There were negative perceptions of downtown Saginaw. Many of those continue, although I think they might now, 5 years later, be starting to change a little bit. Again, this belief among some that the facility should be self-supporting, and George Olson figure. George Olson was, before he passed away, affectionately known as the quote-unquote king of Saginaw Township. So when the first millage passed in 2001, it was very much on the ropes. George Olson, the leader of Saginaw Township, actually was very outspoken in support of the Dow Event Center, which had been known as the Saginaw Civic Center. For the first 30 years of its life, it was a City of Saginaw facility. So when he came out and supported it, that caused a lot of people to ride on his coattails and say, okay, we'll support it too. But there's nobody like that for our campaign. Be positive, be relentlessly positive. Whatever else you take away from this presentation, if you want to apply it to your own lives, people have lots of reasons to be negative. Okay? You have to be positive and be relentlessly positive if you want to get people on your side with any particular cause. But most people also want to see a brighter future for themselves and their families. They want to believe that things can and indeed will get better. So, what did we do? Public appearances, we went out and made lots of presentations to civic and business groups. We made sure we were at chamber and business events. We walked in the Freeland and Swan Valley High School homecoming parades, anything we could to make sure we were getting out there, getting people to think about this and encouraging them to vote yes. We printed 1,000 yard signs. We had over 40,000 postcards printed. Most of those were mailed. 50 t-shirts, again, for the people who are walking and doing those kinds of things. This is our campaign postcard, and all of those key messages came from the polling data, but also I wanted something that people could read in about a minute. Okay, I didn't want a whole lot of copy. Again, you can look at this, pick up some information in about a minute. From a media relations standpoint, we did get the Saginaw News endorsement. They came out in support of the millage. We had some earned media coverage, TV, radio, newspapers covering our campaign activities. We did radio appearances on both news stations and on the morning shows where they just like you to sit there so that they can make fun of you. It's okay. If people are going to hear about the millage, I'm willing to take that. We built a very simple website for the campaign. We did have an active Facebook page. I know most of you were probably still in high school at that time, but Facebook was not nearly as prevalent or as widespread as it is today, but it was still important to our campaign. Comments on MLive. How many of you read MLive? Okay, for news and things, a few of you. So people have comments, that they can post below the stories, and those people tend to, again, be overwhelmingly negative and those kinds of things. So we didn't do a lot of wading into the comment stream. We did that sparingly, mainly to correct errors of fact and those kinds of things. But we did monitor that online activity, and we responded as appropriate. So if you're ever going to be in a leadership position, you better be willing to and accept that people are going to criticize you. If you don't want to take the criticism, it's going to be very difficult to do that. So this very informed individual, calls me out by name, tells me everything that we're doing from a campaign tactical standpoint is wrong. Well, as you're going to find out, in fact, he was wrong and I was right. But that was based on polling data too. I wasn't guessing what we should be doing. I had the data to tell me what we should be doing. So our door-to-door campaign, we had 2 weeks in late October where we really tried to do that. We concentrated on Saginaw Township. That's what the commenter thought, well, that was stupid, people there are already supporting you. Yeah, but that was where the gap was widest, so the more people knew in Saginaw Township, the more likely they were to support us, and that's what we were trying to accomplish. Plus, that's walkable, whereas the rural parts of Saginaw County, I'm not gonna be able to knock on 100 doors in a night. I'm gonna maybe be able to knock on 10 or 15. We also did 3 nights of phone calls in a phone bank. We concentrated on the Saginaw Township, the city of Saginaw, and Carlton Township, again, more heavily populated areas, and here are the results. It passed by more than 15,000 votes and with more than 62% support. So we did run a very effective campaign. Now, I don't deserve much credit for that other than making sure that we had the data to back it up. Most of the credit for that, again, if you remember some of the earlier slides, people were actually using the Dow Event Center. They were having a good experience. That's the primary reason, in my judgment, why it passed so widely. But again, inside the results, there are 30 municipalities in Saginaw County. The yes percentage actually increased in 28 out of those 30 municipalities. So that's one of the things I am proud of. We really did a good job of convincing people all across the county. It actually dropped in the city where the Dow Event Center is located and in Buena Vista Township, although it didn't drop by very much. But one of our theories as to why that might be is population shift. There were more people living in the city in 2001 than there were in 2010. Some of those people who probably voted yes in 2001 had since moved out to the suburbs. But there was a very dramatic out-county increase. So Bloomfield Township is the township immediately north of Frankenmuth. It's at the northeast corner of Saginaw County. It's not very populated, very rural, mostly farmers. And remember, anything with a property tax, farmers pay a whole lot more than the average homeowner because they own a lot more land. But even in Bloomfield Township, it passed with more than 53% support. And again, Saginaw Township, where we really concentrated a lot of our campaign efforts, it went up from 65.5% to 73.5%. So after the campaign, this was the part that when I actually did read the comments, it really made me smile, right? So all of you can picture your little old grandma, who lives out in the country, sitting and saying, you know what, even though I'm 30 miles away from the Dow Event Center, I'm glad this passed. I'm willing to pay more taxes. And so, but those aren't the people who are in the comment streams. She never posted this before the campaign, she posted this after the campaign. So during the campaign, you hear from all the people who are against what you're doing. It's only after the campaign that some of these people finally start to speak up. So again, some of the public relations lessons I learned: good data is your best friend. Again, here's your whole binder for the Saginaw Township campaign that you had. Again, it takes all the guesswork out of it. Passion provides fuel. So the other thing that was going on in the fall of 2010 is that after I agreed to become the campaign chairman, I was getting married in September of 2010. So I'm supposed to try to help my then future, now current wife, help plan a wedding, and I do have a day job, I do broadcast football games, so I'm traveling a lot of weekends and all those kinds of things. So you're really going to stretch yourself sometimes, but if you really believe in a cause, it's amazing how you can get up at 5 in the morning and say, I'm going to go tackle this again for another day. And I've subtly said this a couple of other ways, but again, don't mistake online conversation for public opinion. Okay? There were lots of people who were very outspoken against this measure, but it actually passed by a very wide margin. So just because people are saying negative things, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's reflective of society at large. And then again, be positive, be relentlessly positive. So very quickly on the Saginaw Township Police Millage, a couple of things we learned from this. So these were our campaign postcards, and I can send these around. So one of the things we found out from polling data for the Saginaw Township Police Millage is that the police department among township residents had a 90% approval rating and a 90% satisfaction rate. People thought the police department was doing a very good job. So who do you put on the front of your campaign postcard? You take a male officer and a female officer, and you put them in uniform on the front of your campaign postcard. So this just passed this past August as a 15-year millage. It nearly doubled people's taxes compared to what they had been paying, but people wanted to keep their community safe. We found out people didn't feel very safe in Saginaw Township. So I'll pass these around and you can take a look at that as well, as that's a more recent example. And if you have questions about that campaign too, I'd be happy to answer them. But again, we gathered a lot of data to find out what do people think. And then you reinforce those messages that are most likely to cause people to vote yes in support of your cause. And that's what we did in both of these campaigns, but that's a more recent example. I just haven't put it all into a PowerPoint yet. But with that, I'd be happy to take any questions that people might have. Yes?